talking about the rise of the far right, if you read The Guardian, you'll have heard that Parkrun has been almost taken over by the far right or influenced by the far right, or the far right have threatened this beautiful community-spirited weekly run in some way. So essentially, this is the story, long-running kind of complaints from various female sportswomen that Parkrun allows essentially gender self-ID in a lot of its league tables and things like that in the recording of records. I think it was discovered that around 3 of the sort of historical records that Parkrun has in the women's category are actually by men.
Congratulations.
Congratulations to them, well done. But essentially, Parkrun has responded to this by deleting all of the public records by saying no one will get to see their score anymore. Thank you very much. Tom, what have you made of this row?
It's one way to deal with it, I suppose.
Yeah.
I don't know how anyone else could learn from that. But yes, this is something, as you say, which has been going on for a long time. As is ever the case when a story like this flares up, there's this attempt to pretend like the backlash to Parkrun had come out of nowhere.
Yeah.
I mean, that piece in The Guardian you refer to, I think even suggests that basically policy exchange is at the heart of a sort of nefarious agenda.
Is it the right starting another culture?
Yeah.
What I love about that piece
was the
specificity that a shady Westminster think tank was leading this backlash against Parkrun as part of their whatever agenda.
Probably funded by US evangelical Christians.
Or Vladimir Putin. Who knows?
Yeah.
Possibly both.
Yeah.
That's always part of the story here, apparently. But of course, this has been going on for a long time. It's always been that kind of extra part of the women's sports story and debate that's been going on for a very long time, which is that, yes, Parkrun is basically a kind of weekly fun run as far as I understand it. This isn't something in which people are expected to kind of compete at a very high level. It's not something where people are being routinely sort of drugs tested and so on.
Yeah.
These are not the kind of standards that we're talking about. But as I understand it, it's something in which people really enjoy those totals. It's something which can kind of spur them on. People who are having kind of either regional or even national records, it's something that they're naturally going to take a lot of pride in. And this is for people who obviously aren't going to be competing at the high level. So this is their kind of level. This is something that they're getting a lot of enjoyment from. And as sure as night follows day, we find out that men are smashing those records in the women's category because of this ridiculous self-ID policy. I think it's regrettable that they felt like this was the only possible thing that they could do. But that's the nature of it, unfortunately, because it's telling the Parkrun example as well, because when you think about it, to appease a very small number of people who want their own sense of themselves and identity to overwhelm basic fairness on this app. And because of the media, they feel it's better to throw those women parkrunners under the bus than actually just say, you know what, we're going to have a male category, we're going to have a female category. You can even, dress it up as that's sex, that's not gender, we're not judging, and there's going to be an open category of some sort. We'll just get along with that. That would seem to me to be something which should, in any normal era, please everyone more or less.
Yeah.
And to the extent that there is going to be a backlash, that's just going to be from some quite unreasonable people. The fact that that wasn't the move, I think, tells you about where we're at right now, which is that it's almost much higher up the priorities list to try to appease at least a very small number of people who are shouting very loudly at you, particularly if they're coming from the media establishment.
And Benedict, I mean, the sort of Parkrun defenders, I guess, they'll say, look, this is a fun run. This is not about competitions. It's not at the elite level. But surely, shouldn't women have their own sports at the grassroots level as well? When did we decide that, I don't know, grassroots football or running or whatever it might be doesn't matter?
I mean, it's that sort of the creeping slippery slope idea that, it's just this, what's the issue? It's just that the issue. And then, it's everything. And you're no longer, the majority. You're in the wrong. I mean, it's interesting that talking about the sort of the very vocal minority, given that we've been talking about the very vocal minority when it comes to Labour Party politics, and actually how a very small but very determined group of people can get very far in life if they just shout and scream loud enough. And if they get enough people on side in the media who decide that this is a story and that something has to be done, that an organisation will decide, well, yes, actually, they're right, something does have to be done, and that means that we're going to have to cave. And really, I think that this shows sort of the decline of the high trust society in a way, which is that you need some basic things that everybody can agree on. I'm not talking about politics necessarily, just basic tenets of life that everybody can agree we're going to base ourselves around. And if that comes down to really basic things like gender categories, be it at school, be it in sport, once upon a time, those were things everybody could basically agree on. And okay, there were the odd examples here or there, but you made do. You found a workaround. You had a bit of a fudge. It was fine. But if we're even getting to that stage where the basic X and Y, if you like, categories are no longer applicable and you just have to tear everything up and start again, it doesn't give you a lot of sort of common ground. And then if you have sort of very angry people on both sides determined that they won't back down on this, it's very hard to see where you kind of meet in the middle. And as you say, this is amateur sports. This is not something around which people should be centering their lives. And yet they are, because a small group of people have decided that their personal identity, how they define themselves, is more important than absolutely everybody else's right to have fun amateur sports. That is a tyranny. Ultimately, and as I say, it's not too dissimilar to people in Rochdale deciding, do you know what, Gaza is significantly more important than the ability of my hospital to function. And I don't think that we want to get ourselves into a situation where those people determine how the country is run, and yet here we are. And I think it's about how we find a way of outmaneuvering those people to say, no, actually, your voices are loud, but they're not the most important of the room. That is how you will find political progress in this country and social progress.
And Tom, I mean, the question of women's sports is actually not just about league tables and things like that, or places on the competition team, those kinds of things. It's also about things like changing rooms. And, we've seen in various places where essentially trans women, as they're called, are allowed into women's and girls' changing rooms to compete alongside teams. I mean, that's a whole other level of, a thing that needs to be addressed.
Oh, absolutely. And I think it speaks to your point, Benedict, about there are certain things that we should, as a society, sort of agree on. And that's not because we're trying to force some kind of consensus. It's because there are certain things as facts, as biological, objective, easily observable facts, one of which is that there are two sexes. And we've previously understood in quite an enlightened way, I think, that certain things in society should flow from that.
Yeah.
For instance, sex-based rights. For instance, women's only spaces. For instance, the fact that we recognise that women, particularly if they're in a changing room or in a bathroom, whatever, are particularly vulnerable. Therefore, allowing biological males into that space is probably not a good idea. All of this has been sort of obliterated at a stroke, but because of the desire to essentially indulge the identities of a small number of individuals. But the costs of it are so incredibly severe, because downstream from that is allowing men to compete against women in sports. Downstream from that is putting men into women's prisons. A hell of a lot happens when you concede it's not even the principle, it's just the recognition of reality in effect. And so to present this as a culture, or to present this as something that doesn't really matter, I find really strange. I also find the deflections from the people who've been writing about this, like that ridiculous piece in The Guardian, really quite odd, insofar as almost suggesting that none of this really matters unless you're talking about the Olympics. Which is an odd approach anyway. First of all, because I'm pretty sure the author of that article probably wants gender self-ID in the Olympics, so I don't really get why he's even making that point. But also, grassroots sports, fun runs like this, things like that, is how the vast majority of people engage and participate in sport. It's a very tiny, tiny, tiny number of people who get to compete at the top level. Are we to suggest that fair sport and competition and people being able to, again, be rewarded for their own achievements in their specific category should only exist when you get to the very top level? Of course they don't, but it's the fact that they're having to trot out those arguments, I think, on one sense, shows that they're on the back foot a little bit. They realise that they're losing the argument in so many different ways. And so they're reduced to even making quite spurious arguments, or just trotting out people are going to die if you don't indulge their gender identities, etc., which has been resurrected this week, even in relation to the Parkrun thing somehow.
It's just the thing that always strikes me about the changing room or the prisons argument, which is that trans people claim that they are a different gender, born in the wrong body, whatever it is. And it's always the thing that I think is that there is a visceral fear that the average man can understand but can't entirely sort of empathize with, that a woman has about the idea of a man being with her in a very vulnerable situation. If these people were truly women, they would understand that fear as well, and they would be prepared to concede some ground on this, to say, well, maybe there need to be third changing rooms. We've heard about the sort of the non-binary lavatories or whatever it might be, but maybe there should be some common ground, rather than, no, I am a woman and I demand to barge right in. And that is always the thing that it really sort of sets off the alarm bells. It's not that there is some sort of commonality with women, that, oh, I am a woman and I understand the fear that women understand. It's, no, I am a woman and I demand access to your spaces, which I happen to think is a rather masculine attitude. And it's always that, I am who I am, I demand it, I have a right to it, I'm going to take it. Which, without meaning to generalize, it does seem slightly more forceful, if you like, than the average woman who doesn't necessarily barge straight into a space and take what she wants. That's always been the thing that stands out for me about this whole debate, that there is just something quite off about it there.